So let's see here. Excellent. Hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
All right. Okay, well, thanks everyone. This is our third webinar as part of the DOE Clean Cities peer-to-peer exchange between Triangle Clean Cities Coalition and the Triangle area and Central Line Clean Fuels Coalition in the Greater Charlotte area. This is task 3 of our scope, which focuses on basically performance metrics and reporting, but specifically incorporating our transportation demand management performance metrics and reporting into what's required for the US DOE Clean Cities program. So here's our agenda. I don't know if we need to do welcome and introductions. I think this is the same crew that was on our last call. So unless anyone objects, we'll just, in the interest of time, move forward and skip that item. So we'll review the learning objectives here on the next slide. We'll talk about the reporting process. That includes metrics and performance indicators that we use for TDM, and then talk about what's required for NCDOT and our MPOs versus what's required for the US DOE Clean Cities program as far as reporting goes. Our deliverable for this task is providing a sample reporting template for Central Line to use, which I included as an attachment in the calendar invite. So hopefully y'all have that, but we'll also review that at the end of the presentation. Then we'll just talk about next steps and have any comments or questions. So we'll take a look at the learning objectives here. So of course, the primary purpose of this task is incorporating, and if folks can mute in the background, that would be great. Incorporating TDM into the Clean Cities reporting process. We'll talk about the metrics and performance indicators that we use as part of the Triangle TDM program. Then, as I mentioned, we'll talk about the similarities and differences in integrating reporting of TDM performance for state DOTs, MPOs, and USDOE and other partners. And then we'll review that sample reporting template. If at any point, if folks have questions, please stop me, just like we did last time. I think, we try to keep this pretty casual. So this slide and the next slide is probably the most complicated part of this entire reporting process. So how do you figure out vehicle miles traveled as a result of behavioral change programs, which is basically a large majority of what transportation demand management is. So the key performance indicators and metric that we use for determining the success of TD vehicle miles traveled, as we've covered in the past. And then you can derive improvements to air quality or emission factors as a result of VMT. So what you see here on the right is an infographic created by Lori Diggins or LDA Consulting. She's basically a contractor for Mobility Lab, which is based out of Arlington. Y'all are probably familiar with Mobility Lab. There's a really good hyperlink down there that has a pretty thick FHWA endorsed handbook for what we're going to go through right now. So I'm going to try to keep this very high level. I thought that we could all maybe go through this together using the calculators on our phones or on our laptops, but I think that's going to take too much time. We've got about 26 slides here, so I'm just going to go through this real quick, and then we'll run through some examples on the next slide. But basically, this infographic talks about how you take any commuter-based activity, so whether it's a bike share event, whether it's a work from home week, whatever it is, and figure out at the end how many vehicle miles traveled are being reduced, and then how you're going to figure out how many CO2 is reduced and any other emission factors. So for any given TDM activity, first you're going to define who your participants are. So let's use Biketoberfest, which just happened in Charlotte, right? Out of Sustain Charlotte, which is actually one of the NCDOT funded TDM programs. Then you're going to calculate your placement rate. So how many of those Biketoberfest participants are going to, as a result, use biking to work as a commute mode in the future? And then you're going to multiply that by an influence factor, which is how many are actually going to change their habit moving forward. Then you multiply that by your vehicle trip reduction factor, which is how many vehicle trips are reduced by that mode change. So if you're biking to work instead of driving alone, how many trips are saved per day? And then you multiply that by your travel distance, and that gets your VMT reduced by the mode change. And from that, you get emission factors. Again, I know that's very high level, which is why we wanted to put this example slide together. So let's take a look at bike share on the far right. So we'll walk through this sample service, but you'll see ride matching. GRH is guaranteed ride home. ERH is emergency ride home there in the center column. So those are required TDM, and so is ride match. That would be share the ride NC, and emergency ride home are two required TDM services for any service provider that receives NCDOT funds. Bike share is not, so we'll use that Biketoberfest example again for bike share. So if you imagine, I'll just go back this infographic, and let's think about that as we go through this example here. So that first part is defining your service user or participant base. So let's say there's 4,400 people. That would be a huge event, huge Biketoberfest event. Let's say that there are 4,400 Biketoberfest participants, and 90% of those 4,400 participants of Biketoberfest actually are employed. So then you go to step 2. What is the placement rate factor? So percent users with continued change. Now you can define this on your own, right? That 40% of folks for an event like Biketoberfest, that's probably a high estimate of people that are going to actually change their typical commute pattern as a result of participating in Biketoberfest. So you can adjust that percentage as you'd like, but for this example, we'll stick with 40%. So then you look at the influence factor, right? So percent changers influenced by the service. So that was that last placement factor. Percent of the program role, which we're saying 25% is the percent of the program of Biketoberfest role in actually influencing change. And that's another percentage that you can adjust as you feel necessary. Again, I would say that 25% is probably too high. If you think about the type of program that Biketoberfest is, a lot of folks are already avid cyclists or just want to get out in their community, maybe biking to work anyway. So maybe you reduce that down to 10%, right? Now, conversely, if you look at Ride Match or the Guaranteed Ride Home or Emergency Ride Home services, those are 100% as they should be, because you have to register for ride matching through NCDOT Share the Ride NC, and also you also have to register as a user for Guaranteed Ride Home and Emergency Ride Home. So that, as it should be, 100% of the program's role in influencing change. So hopefully that makes sense. So then you do the percent influenced by service, multiply that by percent program role to get your influenced placements. So then you take that and you get your vehicle traveled reduction factor. And then finally, you multiply that to get your one-way travel distance factor or continued change distance, which gives you your VMT. So 160 vehicle miles traveled reduced as a result of Biketoberfest. I know that's super complicated and a bit convoluted. This is a pretty standard way to calculate VMT across TDM programs nationally. Lori Diggins created it, gosh, at this point, maybe 20 years ago. As I mentioned, she's now with Mobility Lab. Triangle J Cog brought her in as a consultant to design this methodology for the program back in 2007. And we outsourced this calculation to her for about 3 years. And now we do it in-house. But as I was telling Suchi as we were preparing for this webinar, this is kind of a practice makes perfect type of thing. It seems a little complicated, and it kind of is. But if you just run through this on your own, if you were to take the bike share example and, take a look at this at the same time and just go through it on your own calculator, you'll see it's actually not that difficult. So as far, yes, sure. I knew there'd be questions. Yes.
So first of all, have you gotten any pushback on some of the, indicators and percentages that you're using? And if so, I would imagine that over time you've come to a pretty close range of types of events, types of services that, you kind of have these numbers honed in. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have not received pushback simply because we are intentionally very conservative about what we say that placement rate factor is and what we say the influence of our programs are. So when we present our VMT data to the MPOs or NCDOT, we say that right up front, that if anything, we're discounting the influence of our programs, right? So we're very conservative. And if they say, well, prove it, then we'll show them the influence factor percentage, right? We'll say, look, we're only saying, using Biketoberfest as an example, we're only, like I would say, maybe even 5% of Biketoberfest participants are actually changing their mode, right? So we present it like that, saying that things are very conservative right out front. And to your second question, if you recall how we set up our TDM oversight committee with representatives from our funders, including the MPOs and NCDOT, each fiscal year when a service provider presents their work plan, and so do the oversight committee members, are very, scrutinize the types of programs with this kind of methodology in mind, right? So that we're not just doing table events. We really try to get away from things like that because it's really hard to run this calculation with, a table at an Earth Day, right? It's really hard to understand. And the lower that influence factor percentage is, the less meaningful it is for the program. So hopefully that answers your question.
Hey, Sean, can you talk through the VTR, vehicle trips reduced factor, couple of rows there a bit more? That one, it just kind of flew past me, and I'm not sure if I totally understood how that was determined.
Yeah, that one is always a little tricky for me too. I wish I had the manual in front of me. My understanding of the vehicle trip reduction factor is based on an average commute length for whatever area you are in the triangle. We use 15 miles is the vehicle is a average vehicle trip. So I believe that's where you take that average length of a commute, a typical employment commute, and factor that in. I could be wrong, and I apologize if I don't have the right answer there. But we can follow up and make sure that we get that right for you in the technical report.
Yeah, and just like that's what I was trying to figure out. When I think of a factor, that's just what it sounds like. It's just a number that you're using to, somewhere either below one or above one, and you have both. Below one would diminish the impact, above one would amplify.
Right.
And so, but then I just heard you talking about miles of a trip. So, like, I'm honing in on what unit that's even talking about. Is that, is that tied to miles or is it something else? I think for most of the other, because I see the one-way travel distance, so that I'm assuming is miles, right? So that we could add, just put like to clarify a little parentheses miles. I get it, but it's that factor. Just a little bit more on that would be helpful.
Sure, certainly, and we can certainly follow up with more information. And I apologize, I don't have that detail right now.
No problem. I thought it was just me. That's helpful.
No. It's very complicated, and as I said, so Suchi's on the call with us, who really is the lead administrator of the Triangle program, and neither Suchi or I do this. We actually have a data geek at Triangle J who does this for us internally, along with a lot of our other heavy lifting for water resources and other programs. And as I mentioned, we had outsourced this in the past. But this is really the standard methodology for calculating VMT across the country and has been for a long time. So hopefully this is helpful. It's a little bit out of scope for, I don't think DOE Clean Cities requires this level of detail in calculating VMT as a result of TDM programs. But, I feel like if you're going to do something, you should do it right. And you know, the MPOs really do appreciate this, and DOTs do as well. I don't have another slide for this because I thought it would be too much, but there is the next step that you can do, which is in the manual. And again, if you look down here, I would encourage you, if you want to dive into this, to open up this FHWA endorsed manual that is pretty bulky actually, and explains all this in detail. But there's a next step where you can actually ensure that you're not double counting the influence of any TDM programs. So for example, you've got Biketoberfest, but then you also have, you know, CATS is promoting bike share through another type of event. I'm just making this up at the same time, right? You don't want to double count an individual's mode shift for both of those programs, if that makes sense. So there's a way that you can even do that as well to, again, you know, Michelle, to your earlier question, when you present this and you want to avoid pushback, right, you could say out front that you're being very cautious and conservative, and you're not double counting the influence of what may be a number of programs around bike share or whatever the mode shift goal may be at the same time.
Yeah, Sean, I just had a quick question too, and I think that may also kind of go with what Jason was asking for, was that continued change distance. I just didn't quite understand how that, like how y'all got that from that one-way travel distance factor. So that would, some more information would be helpful. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. I think this is something, again, I learned by doing personally. So, you know, I've gone through this multiple times and just on my calculator ran through it, but, you know, others learn by reading. And so we'll put something down on paper for y'all. But I'd really point you to this, this resource right here to look for much better guidance than what we'll be able to provide. But we'll certainly loop back with some more information on the VTR and total vehicle trip reduced parts of the methodology.
Hey, Sean, would it be easy for you just to copy and paste that into our chat right now, that link, just for us to look up later? I know you'll have the slides.
Yeah, let me do that after I finish presenting, just because I've got the PowerPoint taking up my whole screen here.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we can do that. Unless Suchi, you can do that while we continue here. I just want just to not scare people anymore, but what we're trying to do in the triangle now is even up the ante on what we're doing with this methodology that the Triangle TDM program has been using since 2007, which we just tried to review, which is taking that a step further. So Lori Dickens actually worked with FHWA to create the TDM Return on Investment Calculator, which uses that same methodology that we just reviewed as the base for taking it a step further and figuring out other societal benefits besides vehicle miles traveled and associated air quality benefits as a result of VMT reduced. So those could be everything that you see bulleted there. And in the triangle, we're trying to enhance performance. So we've selected a couple of enhanced metrics that can be calculated by the ROI calculator. We're not going to get into this right now, but I just wanted to share that this is what we're doing in the triangle to try to communicate the benefit of TDM in a way that might be more meaningful to stakeholders and elected officials and basically the community. You know, when you say we're reducing vehicle miles traveled, that might not mean anything to someone, whereas you might say we're reducing vehicle crashes, or we're reducing the amount of construction of new roads needed or maintenance of roads. That might mean a lot more. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what's required for the MPOs. So the key metrics for the MPOs are vehicle miles traveled, but really the function of that is reducing congestion and then emission factors. So our funding and most funding for TDM programs across the country comes from CMAQ, or Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Funds. So I think everyone on the call is familiar with this, but this was established through the Clean Air Act amendments in 1990. The goal of CMAQ is to attain national ambient air quality standards, further reduction in allowable vehicle tailpipe emissions, obviously provide congestion relief. And now the FAST Act each year that the federal highway bill comes out has consistently allocated $2.3 to $2.5 billion for the CMAQ program. So it's a pretty broad net. You can do a lot with CMAQ. Jason and Karina, as you're aware, there are other programs here in North Carolina like the Alternative Transportation, or CFAP, program that utilizes CMAQ funds as well. There's a lot that you could do with this rather large source of funding. But for the MPOs, a lot of MPOs use their local CMAQ funding, as we do in the Triangle with our 2 MPOs. They allocate some of their CMAQ funding to the Triangle's TDM program. And what we are on the hook to report to them is reducing congestion and improving air quality, right? And so just a little graphic there on the right, that means that the MPOs can take this data, and the TRIMS model is something out of Qatar down in Florida, the Center for Urban Transportation Research, who's really the leading research entity for TDM. They developed the TRIMS model, which you may or may not be familiar with, but the MPOs can take this data and really use it for their MTP process and any other planning that they do around congestion. So now we're going to talk a little bit about NCDOT reporting. I believe that I shared this scorecard with you, Jason, and perhaps Matt, you've looked at it as well. As NCDOT updated the statewide TDM plan, they created the scorecard for all funded programs to evaluate on a quarterly basis their performance. So there are 4 essential areas with different performance scores. We'll take a look at that now. This is probably a little difficult to read, especially on a Monday morning, but collaborating on regional TDM services, there's a goal there. I'm not going to read through all this, but you could take a look at it. And Jason, I'll resend the scorecard if you do need the Excel version again. But again, this is what's required for TDM service providers that receive NCDOT grants here in North Carolina. And you're probably scratching your head and wondering, well, where's VMT if that's so important? Well, it's down here in 4.C, which is deployed training for performance calculations. And you'll see measured as certification of training and achievement of quarterly calculation of VMT reduction, as well as other regionally adopted measures. So why is that left open? Well, it's because calculated VMT is going to be very different whether you're in a more rural area like Asheville or the Triad versus a more urbanized area like Charlotte or the Triangle region. And how VMT is calculated, you know, you can outsource it like the Triangle did and have a very methodical process that we reviewed earlier in the presentation, or you can kind of, you know, guesstimate the impacts of your programs, which you know, obviously isn't the best way to do it, but some programs just don't have the funding or capacity to really, you know, get down in the weeds in calculating the impacts of a behavioral change program or programs under their TDM program umbrella. So it's left pretty open, but NCDOT basically is requiring through a pass-fail check here whether you do have a defined methodology that you're using and you are or you are communicating how you're getting your VMT reduction number. So hopefully that makes sense there. And developing an enhanced performance program, that's another item that alludes to what the Triangle program, what we're trying to do right now in not just reporting VMT and associated air quality benefits, but societal benefits as a result of TDM programs. That's what enhanced performance is all about. So if there weren't any,
you don't need to resend the scorecard. We have it.
Okay, good. Okay, so I don't know if Caitlin's on the call. Caitlin, are you here? Okay, so I'll take this then. For US DOE Clean Cities, and Jason, I know you're familiar with this, and so are you, Karina. So this is part of annual reporting, right? And so vehicle miles traveled reductions is something available. And so I've highlighted the types of methods. So those are all the alternative modes, right, that are a part of a TDM program. And then you have your VMT reduction per vehicle, where it asks you to enter the average miles saved per year as a result of these programs. So it's very high level. It's not nearly as detailed as what we do for our MPOs through the Triangle TDM program and what we do for NCDOT. And then I haven't done this in years, Jason or Karina, but this is a screenshot of what it looks like when you're actually inputting this information of VMT reduced in the annual DOE Clean Cities report. So I don't know if either Jason or Karina, you want to speak to this, but as you can see here, it really, in my opinion, doesn't very well lend itself to the types of impact reporting that truly is what we're talking about when we talk about TDM. I think this lends itself more to how are you reducing VMTs for a fleet, right? So this might be something that we work with DOE on a little bit, or NREL, whoever it may be, to see if there's a way that we can improve how TDM metrics are inputted and part of DOE Clean Cities reporting. So right now, this is the only way that you can get those vehicle miles traveled reduction statistics as part of your annual report for Clean Cities.
Yeah, I think you just have to, go through your formal process that you described earlier, and then, come up with some reasonable assumptions about how to translate that over.
Right.
Basically, there's one more step, like you're saying, where you're just carving out those that were impacted by your Clean Cities program specifically. So we have helped a little bit more with some of the transit activities in the region recently, but I think we use a very, very like a 5% or less contribution from the coalition because of, and we can point to specific things we've done through our social media and other things. So it's not just because we're around, we take credit. We do try to show where we've helped to support, but I think, with the level of data and calculations that you described earlier today, that would really bolster and support us even further.
Yeah, I think, Jason, the kind of calculation that we were using for earlier this year, I think that actually was based off of something from Triangle. I could be wrong though, because that was quite a few months ago. But I thought that the method that we had come up with was something that I think you and Sean had originally worked on.
And actually, that was something that we talked through with Larry Kopp at this. He's now retired with CATS, but yeah, it's getting at a lot of the same numbers and trying to evaluate impact. But to Sean's earlier point, we're trying to be very careful about how much we're taking credit for, because obviously there are a lot of voices out there, impacting people.
Yeah, I think we only took about 25 or 50% credit for every VMT reduction that we did, just to be conservative, to not overestimate.
Yeah, and I think, Karina, not to get too far off on it, but I want to say it's even 5% or less, if I recall. But we can look at that again. We wanted to not overdo our influence. And to Sean's point about fleets, how many of these activities are just not fleets, right?
Right.
Light rail use is not necessarily a fleet activity, but it is certainly something that we'd like to think we have an impact on with some of our programs and information we're putting out. So anyway.
Right, or telework, or bike, walk.
Yeah. Whereas bus details, in terms of like when we help the local program go to electric, that's a different impact altogether. That's a direct versus the indirect, I guess, is the easiest way to put it.
So, our last task at Triangle, after we wrap up the peer-to-peer with y'all, is to actually create a webinar for National DOE Clean Cities. And so I think we'd like to kind of gently point this out, that the level of calculations, the conservative calculations, and the types of modes that are non-fleet based that you just outlined, Jason, are really not being captured, or not, DOE's not capturing that information in how reporting is set up right now. I'm sure we won't make a lot of friends making annual reporting a little more complicated for folks. But you know, a lot of DOE Clean Cities programs are housed in organizations that already have TDM programs that have been running for years. So I think it would be really good, at least to bring that up when we do the national webinar, and maybe have a conversation and see if there's a way that DOE can at least offer an option to provide that more detailed report out of TDM results if a coalition is involved in that type of work. So from the last webinar, I think you guys saw this already. You know, we take all that VMT and other associated impact reporting and put it in an annual impact report that we give to our MPOs, and we provide to NCDOT and any other partners as requested. And this is just that visual that you saw from our last presentation as well. There's all kinds of fun things and ways that you can communicate the benefits of these types of efforts in a way that's very friendly to, you know, whether it's John Q. citizen to an elected official. And this is just a screenshot of a couple of screenshots here of what our annual impact report looks like. And we go through each service provider and talk about some very specifics about what they're doing in their hotspot. If you remember how we have the regional program set up, is that service providers are required to identify which hotspot that they'll be providing services to. You know, you can take a look at notable accomplishments if you get to read that. In the Research Triangle Park, they talk about the nearly 55,000 RTP employees that were engaged through their Go RTP TDM program. So stuff like that, you know, I think would be very beneficial for the Charlotte region when you think about the university area as a hotspot, when you think about obviously Center City, when you think about perhaps Ballantyne or South Park, how you're able to leverage that local touch, but coordinate on a regional level with a consistent way to calculate the impact of what these programs are doing year to year. So the key deliverable, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar for this task, is providing a sample reporting template for Central Iowa Clean Fuels Coalition. This is the template that we use, which I think would work very well for the Central Iowa region as well. Also, I think from our last webinar, we discussed the synergistic opportunities of having consistency across the two largest metro regions in how we plan and monitor these programs and report out on these programs to NCDOT, especially as we think about future funding opportunities and having a consistent way to represent on behalf of the state our intention with these programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Suchi now, since she's really the day-to-day administrator of all of our service providers and the regional Triangle TDM program. So she probably looked at these scorecards from each of our service providers more than she cares to. But Suchi, I'll turn it over to you, and maybe we can just run through each of the tabs here as we have screenshots for the next last couple of slides of the presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Sean, and good morning, everyone. So this is as Sean said, this is the template, the quarterly reporting template that each of the grantees has to send to us 30 days after each quarter ends. We send these templates to all of the grantees during the first few weeks of the first quarter, and this template is adjusted according to each grantee, because some are university based and others are municipal employers. So, you know, we adjust that. And as you can see at the bottom, there are several tabs: cover, participation metrics, and marketing, direct outreach, strategic meetings, employer outreach, details, and other. And what you see here is the cover sheet, just you know, what quarter they're reporting for, what county. And then we also ask in this, you know, light orange table below, we just like to get some basic information about them, how many employees and what kind of alternate commute policies they already have in place. So it just helps mentally, you know, to have everything in the same place. Next slide, please, Sean. Thank you. And this is this is the second tab or second sheet in the same Excel one, participating metrics, and probably this is the most important part of a quarterly reporting template where we are basically asking them to report on the numbers, which then go into that calculator that Sean, spoke initially. So we are asking them how many active share the ride and see users are in your hotspot, how many active van pools, van poolers, and a lot of that information comes from our regional transit provider, Go Triangle, because they administer that software. Actually for the entire state, share the ride and see, and they administer the van pool program for the entire region. So they provide those numbers on a quarterly basis to each of the grantees, and then they submit those. Next slide, please.
Just a real quick note right there. So yes, STRNC is share the ride and see. That's, as Suchi mentioned, the statewide ride matching system. And in Charlotte, you may know it as Way to Go CLT, which actually Sustain Charlotte piloted, and now CATS is running Way to Go CLT, but that is essentially Share the Ride and See. And when you go to the Way to Go CLT website, you'll see Share the Ride and See their logo down there in the bottom left. So that is the statewide ride matching software. I think as we discussed last time, major employers like Duke Energy, for example, have their own internal ride matching system that's branded as Duke Energy, but it actually is Share the Ride and See. It's just, I don't know the right way to explain it. It's, I guess, a ghost internal branding of Share the Ride and See that they have for their employees. And that Share the Ride and See, promoting that and encouraging use of Share the Ride and See is a required task of any NCDOT TDM grantee. BWC stands for Best Workplace for Commuters. That's also a required TDM service, which is why we have it here on participation metrics as a key metric per quarter that we ask all of our service providers to report on. Similarly, in the Central Carolina area, any coordination with TDM through NCDOT is going to require both Share the Ride and See and Best Workplace for Commuter performance reporting.
Thank you, Sean. That was great. And then the next one is for reporting on the marketing, because basically they push out the TDM programs by doing a lot of marketing. And this year only, we kind of reached out to all of our partners and specifically asked them what kind of social media tools they're using, because not all of them use the same tools. And so as you can see, we are asking them, if they're using Facebook page, so Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then how many posts that they made and what's the total estimated reach. And this reach would depend upon what kind of a platform they are using. So if it was Facebook, how many number of engagements happened. If it's Twitter, how many number of impressions happened, and that kind of a stuff. So just basically that depends upon what kind of social media tools are being used by whoever the grantee is. Thank you. And next slide, please. Then this is the tab for getting information on how many in-person and now basically virtual outreach that was done to the commuters. We basically ask them what kind of an event was that, where did it happen, how many people attended, and if there were any comments, are they going to follow up or not. So just collecting some kind of basic information there from them. Next slide, please. And then this one here, we try to capture what are the strategic meetings they did. Did they attend? We always encourage our partners to collaborate with each other. And as you know, Go Triangle is a regional partner. There are always regional campaigns which are administered by Go Triangle. They do all the legwork, and the partners just implement this. So we like to capture what kind of conversations happened there, in-person meetings, anything. So here, we capture all those kind of meetings that happen in the hotspots.
Thanks, Suchi. And I'd like to add a little bit more here. This is more important than it might seem, I would say. you might be scratching your head wondering, well, why are we capturing every meeting that we have? Well, that's part of the issue here. We found in the Triangle program that yes, while we do encourage coordination between Go Triangle and all the local service providers, so that if there's a regional campaign that Go Triangle's pushing out, that the same messaging, the same promotional items, whatever it may be, is consistent across the region, whether NC State or Duke University is promoting that same event, that they're all doing it in unison and in coordination, because obviously it's going to be a much more effective effort if there is regional coordination. And that's the whole point of the structure that we have set up with the Triangle TDM program. But we have found that sometimes folks meet just to meet. And it really isn't a strategic meeting. It's more of just getting together and, bringing in lunch. But there really isn't anything strategic or anything that's resulting from that meeting. So this is how we're able to really, keep the programs on track and make sure that time is being used efficiently and trying to understand what the result is of collaborating. So it's a way to, I think, fairly balance coordinating across multiple programs in very different and unique locations in some cases towards a common goal. So it's a way to just kind of keep a pulse as to what's going on with all these different service providers and how they coordinate.
Yes. Yeah, that was definitely helpful, Sean. Thank you for adding that. And then this is another tab, and this is a new tab that we added actually this year only for this fiscal year. And so you see, as we had mentioned in our last webinar, we basically under Triangle TDM program have two kind of grantees mostly. One are the university grantees, and the other are the municipalities, Raleigh, Durham, Orange County, and all. And the municipal partners, they do TDM outreach to the employers in their hotspots. And they push out the materials, they go and do tabling events, they answer any queries. So they do a lot there, and we wanted to kind of keep an accounting on what are the employers they are getting in touch with, are there any employers they are missing, what kind of support are they actually providing to these employers. So we added this, this sheet, and we do understand that best workplaces for commuters, BWC, that's also a program that works with the employers, but then there are many employers who get that BWC recognition, but not all of them do. There's a fee involved, and some of them are just beginning. So we thought by having a list of all the employers here, it would help us to kind of have a master list. What are we addressing? Smaller employers too, or only the bigger employers? Are we missing the boat somewhere? So in that sense, we added this sheet here to understand, are we having large employees? What's the number of employees done? Are they teleworking? So those kind of things, just to get a pulse, of what's happening in the region.
Yeah, and this is critical. And as Suchi mentioned, it allows us to be a bit of a clearinghouse for understanding and having a master list of major employers and any employer really that we're targeting through this program. And when we're taking a look at updating the Triangle TDM program, something that came to light is that a lot of mom and pop shops, if you will, with 10 employees max or less, if you think about the resurgence of the central business districts and, mom and pop owned businesses, small businesses. If you look at a downtown Durham where you have a lot of those types of businesses, our TDM program hadn't been reaching those. Yet they're in the most congested area of Durham County, right, in the CBD. So understanding, because of course you want to target your major employers like a Duke Energy, like a Bank of America, like a Wells Fargo in Charlotte, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't influence commute patterns for smaller employers as well. So as Suchi mentioned, this is a way for us to make sure that we're reaching all employers in our communities.
Thank you, Sean. And I believe this is the last tab on the template. basically to capture anything that hasn't been captured in the other ones. Our program does, we normally every year at the ACT conference, which is Association for Commuter Transportation, is the premier organization on TDM in the nation. Almost every year we do win an award. Yay, our grantees are doing well, and there are trainings that are held that are organized by TJCOG. This year we have already organized a training on Google Analytics because we wanted, the folks to present, keep a tab on, what's the kind of how many website users and all. So those kind of trainings we keep on organizing. So we like to capture those. And so this, tab basically captures things.
Great. Thanks, Suchi. Any questions on the template?
I see that the metrics are broken out by quarter. Do you require them to turn them in each quarter, or do you wait until the end of the year and they turn everything in?
I'll answer first, Suchi, and then anything I missed, please fill in the gaps. Yes, we do require them to report quarterly, and we report to our MPOs quarterly as well.
And on the, it looks like you're working with your key partners to get all this, but then on the employer outreach piece, is it basically putting it on each of your partners to then go get that full list of all the employer partners they're working with? And for instance, number of people teleworking?
So in that one, Sean, do you mind please going to that?
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, you want me to go to that?
Yes, please, if you don't mind. I think it's the next one after this. Yeah. So this is, yes, I think for this, as I said before, this is a sheet. This is the data collection thing that we have introduced only this year. And for this, we are depending upon our partners to reach out to their own employee outreach coordinators. And we don't know what kind of data we will get. But considering right now we are in the middle of the pandemic and a large percentage of staff, of employers, they are teleworking, so we are expecting high numbers there, and we are also thinking probably it would not be as hard for our partners to get those numbers. But I think I can say that in the past, it would have been a little bit of a challenge because most of the organizations were not as willing to promote telework, So yes, that's something we have to wait and watch for, what kind of numbers we get or don't get,
Yeah, and the reason I was headed that way, I saw that also Vanpool caught my attention. And earlier it just said, basically who's offering teleworking, right? But it doesn't mean that anyone's taking advantage of it. So as you get these on a quarterly basis, is it that what percentage of employees teleworked at least once over the entire quarter, one time per week? Like, so that the details about what is considered teleworking, would be of interest. And then like with Vanpool, I'm wondering if that's pushed to the employer right here, because it's again, one thing to say we've got 120 Vanpools out there, but it's really kind of how many people are in those Vanpools actively using them, and those details. Is that something that's already being tracked by those transit providers that are running the Vanpool programs? I'm guessing so, since there's clearly some dollars exchanged or some other arrangements that have to be agreed upon. And so just, but at the same time, to be signed up is one thing, to use them is another. So just trying to dive into that a little bit further.
Sure. So I think regarding the Vanpool question, you're very correct. We are tracking, and basically it's the Go Triangle because they run that Vanpool program, Commute with Enterprise. So they have complete detail on, I think we have about 30 Vanpools in the area right now, and they have all the detailed information. Like each Vanpool has say 10 rider capacity, but given the pandemic only, and because of the social distancing thing, only 5 are riding, and to and from, all that kind of detail is available. And I think it's an easier way for us as a program to get that kind of data instead of going to each employer, And then, does that help, Jason? Is that what?
Yeah. Connecting between the employer and then whoever's operating the van pool program. And I have a follow-up, but go ahead and touch on the teleworking, please.
Sure. So that part, we did have a discussion internally. We are at the moment, at least, we are very reluctant to go into that kind of a detail, because if we ask our partners to ask their employees, provide them that kind of a detail, we are not really sure, because that's a lot of detail. And we have been told that many organizations who do have telework policy, I mean, not now, not considering the times now, but in the pre-COVID times, they were either not encouraging, or it was done, it was based on supervisor, and people didn't want to report that they were being permitted to telework, while some others in a different department or in their own department were not permitted. So those kind of statistics normally didn't flow down to that employee outreach coordinator. And we didn't really want to make things so tough. So we were like, okay, we can just hold off on that thing. Let's just get some broad level data, So we are not yet there.
Right. Well, that's fair enough, and I appreciate the honesty, because I think that is a tough one, and something that is a real issue. Real quickly on Vanpool, do you see in the triangle any geographic challenges in that you've got a provider, I guess with your setup, Go Triangle is truly regional. I'm thinking in our area, we've got a City of Charlotte department in CAT operating the Vanpool system. And what my very rudimentary understanding is, there's a policy at least in place that the Vanpool must originate or end in Mecklenburg County. And I could be off on exactly if, is that City of Charlotte, is that even in place at all? But I'm wondering if this is kind of a common concern across other regions, or maybe unique to us, about kind of where Vanpools must operate. In other words, we see folks actually in some of our rural counties that could stand to use Vanpools that originate and end outside of Mecklenburg completely, that might have some pockets that aren't served by transit, but could really use that help getting people to their work sites. So just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. As far as I know, there is no such restriction here, because when I see at that quarterly data, some of them, they start from not Wilmington, I think Fayetteville, and they come as far as Raleigh area. So I'm not aware of any such restriction, with our program. But if you would like, I can go ahead and check. But I've never really heard it even mentioned or anything. But I'm happy to still double check.
Yeah, van pooling has been very successful in the Triangle area. Every van pool that Go Triangle has operated has always been at capacity. So it's really just, a cost benefit thing for them, how many they can run and maintenance and all that. I think, they could add 10 more vans and they'd all be full. So it's just the logistical challenge and monetary challenge. Did you have a comment, Jason? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's great. Thanks.
And come to think about it, I know that if there was any such restriction, our Triangle TDM program is for the 7 counties, and some of the vans do come from outside the 7 counties. So that would not have happened if there was any such restriction. And so I'm thinking, no, we don't have that.
Yeah, and as Suchi volunteered, we're happy to dive into that a little bit more. We could even put you in touch with the Vanpool managers at Go Triangle. They've been looking at this because it's been so successful for years now. I believe, Suchi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that they've always contracted out to enterprise to manage their van pools. That might have changed in the past year.
Actually, they were running the vans themselves, but because of the financial issues, they did contract it out, I think 2 years back.
Okay, right. Okay, well, we're almost at time here. So let's see, next steps. Well, we just finished task 3 today. So our final task for y'all is basically creating a action plan or an implementation plan with a checklist and program report where I assume we'll just compile everything that we've done over the past 3 webinars into one report for y'all. Then we'll take that to the National DOE Clean Cities program with a webinar and toolkit for any coalitions that are interested. So I know that was a lot. We've got some follow-up items for y'all. It's 9:59 on a Monday morning. Any other questions or comments?
Sean, just for that 4th session, is that something you'll send around a doodle poll on, or I don't think we have it on our calendars, right?
Certainly, yeah, and we'll want to get it done before Thanksgiving. I think we could all agree on that. Okay. Well, if there wasn't anything else, thank you all so much for your time this morning. We will follow up with notes and some of those items that we owe y'all. And thanks so much. Have a great week.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.